Hey my loves, and welcome back to the channel. I'm really glad you're here today, because the story we're talking about isn't just another headline you scroll past. It's one of those moments that makes you pause and ask yourself some uncomfortable questions about power, law, and humanity. So take a breath, settle in, and let's walk through this together. Over the past few days, a story out of Minnesota has sparked outrage, confusion, and a lot of soul-searching across the United States. According to reporting by The Guardian, U.S. immigration agents detained a 2-year-old girl along with her father during an enforcement action in Minneapolis. Just saying that out loud already feels heavy. A 2-year-old, someone who barely understands the world, suddenly caught up in a system designed for adults, paperwork, and enforcement. Here's what we know. The father and his toddler were stopped by immigration officers while they were out in their community. Lawyers for the family say the officers did not have a warrant at the time. After the stop, both the father and his daughter were taken into custody. Almost immediately, legal advocates rushed to court, and a federal judge issued an emergency order. That order said the child should be released, and that the government should not move her out of Minnesota. Now here's where things get especially troubling. Despite that court order, the father and the 2-year-old were placed on a flight and sent to a detention facility in Texas. Think about that for a second. A judge says, "Do not move this child," and yet the move happens anyway. What does that say about the balance between the courts and federal enforcement agencies? And if a court order can be ignored in a case involving a toddler, what does that mean for everyone else? Eventually, after intense public pressure and legal action, the little girl was returned to Minnesota and reunited with her mother. That part of the story brings some relief. But her father remains in detention, and the legal fight is far from over. For this family, the nightmare didn't end with the reunion. It just changed shape. Supporters of the family argue that this case shows an increasingly aggressive approach to immigration enforcement under President Trump's administration. They say children, even very young ones, are being swept up in actions that prioritize speed and control over care and due process. Lawyers involved in the case describe the experience as traumatic, not just for the child, but for the entire family. On the other side, the Department of Homeland Security has defended the actions. Officials claim the father had previously violated immigration law and argue that the officers believed there were safety concerns at the time of the stop. They've also disputed parts of the family's account, including claims about whether the child could have been released to her mother immediately. So we have two very different narratives colliding, and that's often where public trust starts to fracture. This story also didn't happen in isolation. Around the same time, there were reports of other young children being detained alongside parents during immigration actions, including another case in Minnesota involving a 5-year-old. When patterns start to appear, people naturally begin to ask bigger questions. Is this about individual decisions by officers, or is it about policy? And if it's about policy, who is ultimately responsible? Here's a question worth sitting with. Where should the line be drawn when it comes to enforcing immigration law and protecting children? Most people agree that countries have the right to enforce their borders and laws. But how that enforcement looks, especially when children are involved, is where opinions sharply divide. Is there a way to uphold the law without putting toddlers in detention scenarios? And if there is, why isn't it being used consistently? Another question that keeps coming up is about accountability. When a judge issues an order and it appears to be ignored, what happens next? Does the system correct itself, or does it quietly move on once the headlines fade? And as members of the public, how much attention do we really pay once the immediate shock wears off? For many communities, especially immigrant communities, stories like this deepen fear and mistrust. Parents wonder what might happen during a routine trip to the store. Children grow up sensing anxiety they may not fully understand. Even people far removed from immigration issues are asking themselves how comfortable they are with a system that can place a 2-year-old on a plane to a detention center hundreds of miles away. At the same time, supporters of strict enforcement argue that making exceptions weakens the rule of law and encourages further violations. They believe responsibility ultimately lies with adults who put their families in these situations. That perspective is part of the national debate too, and it's one that continues to shape political decisions and rhetoric. But beyond politics, beyond policy arguments, there's a very human image at the center of this story. A small child, separated from familiar surroundings, unable to understand why everything suddenly changed. Whether you're deeply political or not at all, it's hard to ignore that image. It forces a question that cuts through ideology. What kind of system do we want to be comfortable defending? As this case continues to move through the courts, it may influence future decisions about how immigration enforcement is carried out inside U.S. communities. It may also add fuel to ongoing debates about oversight, judicial authority, and the treatment of families under immigration law. Or, like so many stories before it, it may fade from the spotlight while the underlying issues remain unresolved. So, I want to hear from you. When you hear about a case like this, what's your first reaction? Do you think current immigration enforcement practices strike the right balance, or do they need serious reform? And how much responsibility should agencies have to prioritize the well-being of children, even when enforcing the law? If you found this breakdown helpful or thought-provoking, please take a moment to like the video. It really helps the channel reach more people. Share it with someone who might want to think through these issues too, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss future videos where we unpack the stories behind the headlines. Thanks so much for spending these minutes with me. Stay curious, stay compassionate, and I'll see you in the next one.